I guess we've talked a little bit about the negative patterns, the harmful patterns, the things that are causing damage. So how should it be done, right? What would be the most ideal way to make requests? Welcome to the Do You Feel Heard podcast, a production of Helping the Herd. Helping the Herd is committed to empowering individuals to liberate themselves from the patterns that keep them from creating their ideal life. If you like this podcast, visit helpingtheherd.com to find resources and personalized coaching to empower you to be your best self. Welcome, everyone, to the Do You Feel Heard podcast. This is a unique episode where it is just yours truly today. Our scheduled guest for this week had a scheduled conflict, and we've had to reschedule them for a couple of weeks from now. So don't worry, we will still get to them, but it will not be today. And similarly, my co-host Derek has found himself unavailable today as well. So bear with me, as this is my first solo episode, and we're going to figure it out together. Today I wanted to touch on and explore some things that have been particularly relevant in my life with some interpersonal relationships and communication things that I've seen come up, and most of it revolving around consent. So when it comes to consent, and I've said this a lot, so if you're a repeat guest, bear with me, but when I was young, the extent of consent when it was presented to me was if I wanted to be physically intimate or be physically involved in any way, touch another person, specifically someone of the opposite sex, it was imperative that I get consent. The focus was on rape. The focus was on, intimacy, essentially. And beyond that, there was no conversation. There was no continuation beyond that. It was, if you want to touch somebody, you've got to get permission. Otherwise, just do whatever, essentially. Look around you. Look to your peers, look to the media, look to your environment to make your decisions regarding other aspects of consent. And in my environment, there was no other model for consent. There was no other instances where people were specifically speaking to consent and when it's important to seek consent. And so I didn't learn any other relationship. I didn't develop a relationship with consent because I didn't learn any other aspects of consent. And so until I was in my 30s, when I was introduced to Dr. Betty Martin's model of consent, which is the wheel of consent, can't recommend it enough. She wrote a book called The Art of Giving and Receiving, and these concepts have been life-altering, to say the least. And ultimately, what I think is important for people to understand, if you aren't familiar with these concepts, is every person has within them a domain. And your domain has, I think it's easiest if you imagine a circle. And inside of this circle is where you keep all of the things that are yours, that you're like unalienable things, aspects of yourself, your feelings, your thoughts, your desires, the way you perceive the world, your if I didn't say wants are in there, needs are in there, your body, like your physical body, all of those things belong to you. No one has any right to reach into that circle and manipulate or alter or take away your right to those things. Those things are yours. And with that, you also have a responsibility for all of those things, because they are yours and no one else's. And so it would not be fair to hold other people responsible for your wants or your desires or your body. And so I think it's important first to understand that. So that's our baseline, that's domain, and it's a circle, and that's where you keep all the things that are yours. At the rootest, like at the deepest root level, like these things are yours, they belong to you. And surrounding that circle, protecting that circle is a boundary, a wall, you know, imagine maybe like a force field even. And anytime someone attempts to reach into that domain, that force field is, violated, activated, engaged even. And the emotion that is evoked or that is activated when that force field is broken or when someone violates that force field, that emotion is anger. And that emotion is going to vary depending on what the violation is, right? If somebody is, example here, you're venting or communicating with a friend about, or a family member about, experience that you had and the feelings that you're experiencing, and they say, well, you shouldn't be so upset. It's not that big of a deal. Or, you're overreacting, or maybe, you're being a little dramatic here. What's effectively happening on the inside, under all these layers of the human experience that you may not be aware of inside of yourself, is that your domain is being violated when somebody is telling you to feel differently than you feel, or that the way that you're feeling is wrong or is not acceptable or appropriate or proportional to your experience, which, unless it's a licensed professional, and even then, I don't know exactly when it would be fully appropriate for someone to tell you when your feelings are not appropriate or that you shouldn't be feeling them. And of course, we get into that word should there, which is important because I think that's also tied into this. That feeling, or the implication of should, is that it's wrong to be doing it. And so for anyone to tell you or imply that you experiencing what's in your domain is wrong in any way, I'm sure there are examples and exceptions, but I think they're few. There's few of them. Most of the time, no one has a right to tell you whether or not your feelings are valid or appropriate. Getting off on a tangent there, coming back. When someone is communicating to you, a family member or a friend or somebody is communicating to you, you shouldn't be feeling that way, or those feelings are a little dramatic or whatever, what's happening on some level is your body is going to respond to that reach into your domain. And again, that emotion is anger that is going to be activated. And so with something like that, maybe the anger is a 10 out of 100. And so your response might be to just blow them off, or to maybe snap at them, maybe like I'm allowed to feel my feelings. Or maybe you shut down, maybe you pull away. But a fairly small reaction compared to somebody maybe violating your body, which is also in your domain. And so maybe somebody touching you inappropriately, that might evoke a stronger anger response. That might be upwards of 70 or an 80 of being really upset that somebody felt entitled or felt like they had the right to reach into your domain and engage you physically without your consent. And so these are a couple of, crude examples, pretty surface level examples, and it gets very nuanced, and it gets very, I don't know the right word, complicated maybe. That's not the word I want to use, but that's what we're going to go with. The more you understand these concepts and the deeper that you go, and the more aware that you become of your domain, the more instances that you find opportunities for consent that you might not have found before or been aware of before. So I want to share a few examples of things that have happened with me recently and how consent plays in. And maybe this will strike a chord for some of you who have also experienced something similar. So there are, in our society, consent isn't, held to be the most important thing, unfortunately. At least outside of physical touch, it's not. I see guilt tripping, ultimatums, coercion. I see these things all the time. In our political sphere, in the media, the way that they depict interpersonal interactions, communications, it is riddled with really unhealthy ways to get people to do something that you want versus making genuine requests that allow the other person to decide whether or not they have the capacity or the availability to do whatever to satisfy your request, or to show up for you in whatever way you're wanting them to. And so the first thing I want to talk about is coercion. A common communication pattern that I see is coercive requests. So maybe it's something like, and this is again crude examples here, but I hope that you can extrapolate them to whatever your experiences are. But let's say, we have Jenny and Johnny, right? And Jenny is tired of picking up Johnny's socks off the floor. And they're been married for a while. And, Jenny has asked many times for Johnny to pick up his socks because she doesn't like having dirty socks lying on the floor. And for some reason, that's just something that Johnny has not been able to adopt, this new way of being tidy, specifically with socks. Not a problem with shirts or pants or whatever, but for whatever reason, his process of taking off his shoes and then his socks, those socks just don't make it into the hamper. So Jenny may start to modify her requests because she really wants these socks off the floor. And so maybe her communication starts to sound like, Johnny, I'm not asking for much here. I'm only asking that you pick up your socks, and I don't think I'm asking too much. This isn't, I'm not asking for grand gestures or for you to clean the house or making all these, comparisons. Instead, she's presenting this request in a way that almost like minimizes and belittles what it's asking of him, so that he will then view it as, well, for me to say I'm not available for this would be wrong or would be unreasonable. But that's not a genuine request. That's manipulative. That is coercive. That type of communication of, I'm not asking for much here, or I don't think I'm asking too much, or this is a small request, or whatever. The person who's making the request does not get to determine the size or the magnitude of the request. Only the person who is receiving the request gets to decide how big of a request it is, because they're the ones that are being asked to meet the request, to satisfy the request. Similarly, we could jump the other direction and say, certain maybe activist groups might not think it's a big request to not drive your car 2 days a week. It's not a big request. It's not asking too much for the sake of the planet and the future of this environment that we all share. It's not too much to ask that everyone across the planet spend less time driving their car to minimize the impact on the environment. For the person who views things in the way that they view it, the way that they, from the person who's committed to the health and, vitality of the earth, asking people to make that modification to their lives might not seem like a big deal for them. They're more than happy to sacrifice 2 days of driving their car a week. They think that that's very reasonable. But they're making the request. And so, yeah, they think that request is reasonable. But somebody else, maybe someone who lives in Los Angeles, who, you know, they're not in a community where you're just going to walk wherever you need to go. There are many major cities where if you do not have a car, it is very difficult to get to where you need to get to. Maybe they live somewhere rural and they're out in the sticks, they're out in the country, and there isn't public transportation that's available. There isn't, ride shares, carpooling options. Those aren't things that are easily accessible for them. And they have to do whatever they need to do in their course of events throughout the week. And not driving that car 2 days a week would be detrimental. Maybe they need to take their kids to school, maybe whatever things. And so the first thing that I want to just highlight is that the person making the request does not get to determine the magnitude of the request. That falls only on the person who is receiving the request, as they have to determine whether or not they can consent to whatever the request is. Similarly, another harmful pattern in communication is guilt. Trying to present a request in a way that the other person receiving the request will feel obligated to do it. And if they don't, that they're wrong and should feel bad or guilty, essentially. Guilty for not obliging a request for whatever reason. And this is a deep aspect of people pleasing. And ultimately that's what this whole episode is going to revolve around, is people pleasing, and the ways that we find ourselves in people pleasing patterns and habits is violating our own availability, bypassing our consent because we view the other person's experience to be more important than ours, or to be, important. I mean, choosing someone else's happiness over your own is people pleasing. And there are plenty of arguments to be made where that's not the case. And what I would say is, it is people pleasing if you can't consent to it. And by consent to it, I mean make that decision because you feel okay with that decision. You are content with making that decision. You've thought about it. You've, reflected and determined the implications of saying yes versus saying no. And you have decided that, yes, even though I'm not fully on board or I don't align with this 100%, which isn't required for consent, you alone decide that you feel comfortable and available to make maybe a concession or a compromise, or you're willing to modify things because you believe that it's best to do that for whatever reasons, but not because of how someone else is going to feel if you don't. If you're making decisions out of fear, if your yes is only a yes because if you say no, the consequences are more than you're willing to accept, you're not fully consenting to it. You're consenting under duress or under coercion, but that's not fully embodying consent. And over time, the more that you make these decisions, the more that you consent to things, you give your consent to things that you don't actually consent to, this is a recipe for disaster. This is a ticking time bomb that eventually is going to become a problem. You can only violate yourself and your integrity and your availability for so long, in my opinion, before it becomes too much. And I think that we see that a lot in relationships, specifically with marriages, with working relationships, with toxic relationships between children and their parents, where maybe they've lived in a, let's talk about parents and children for a second. If that child grew up in a dynamic where the parent ruled by fear, so do as I say because I said so, and if you don't, then there's going to be consequences, or spanking, or, in some cases more than spanking, more physically aggressive consequences than just spanking. Or maybe it could be like emotional manipulation of like, I'm going, the parent maybe withholds their love and affection or their attention or whatever that they're choosing to weaponize in order to gain, what's the right word? Come on, words. Compliance? That's not the word I want, but that'll work for now. Obedience. I think obedience and compliance, those two together, is what ultimately in those parenting dynamics is what they're after. Do what I say because I said so. And a lot of times there's hypocrisies there. Do as I say, not as I do. It's a very common thing in that parenting dynamic where that parent a lot of times is a bit of a hypocrite and they will do the exact thing that they're telling the child not to do. And the child is going to do it because of the power dynamic and the fear. And that child desires love and affection and acceptance, unconditional love from that parent. And they're willing to modify their behavior in order to get it. And eventually what happens often, some people, there's exceptions to every rule, and that should go without saying, but I'll say it anyway. There are always exceptions to rules. There are people who will people please till the day they die. There are people who will not ever reach that point of the pot boiling over because it's just too much. There are people that will reach that. But in my experience, and what I believe is that most people will reach a point where it's too much. And in that specific dynamic, what can happen, unfortunately, is that relationship can suffer some serious, severance. There are a lot of times where that child and that parent, that relationship will suffer to the point where they don't have a relationship anymore because the resentment and the trauma has accumulated to the point where it's too much to overcome. It has, it's become more than they're able to or capable to overlook and heal and resolve with that person. And so it's really important that we're aware of these things so that we can prevent these very avoidable consequences of continued patterns emerging and perpetuating. More so even, it's important because that child in that situation is eventually going to grow up to be an adult who's then going to have their own children. And if that person has not healed those things or is not aware of those patterns and the damaging impact that it has had on them and their life and their relationship with their parent, they're going to, unintentionally perpetuate that dynamic, that pattern onto their kids. And one of my favorite examples, and we might get some flack on this, but I welcome it because I believe in this enough to take it, I guess, to take whatever feedback anyone has in opposition of this. But a really common pattern in our society in the United States is around Christmas. And parents knowingly, intentionally lie to their children and tell them that there is a Santa Claus, that it's a real person, and that this person operates on magic and can travel everywhere around the world. And I mean, we all know the story, right? A bunch of reindeer are just pulling a sleigh through the sky across the world, and he is a large man that somehow fits into chimneys and even houses that don't have chimneys to bring presents to children. And they perpetuate this lie over and over again every year until inevitably some kid at school, or nowadays maybe some YouTube video or something, maybe it's mine, maybe it's this one here, but inevitably what happens is the child of that family, they learn that it's all bullshit, that none of it was true, and that they've been lied to by most people probably. I mean, grandma and grandpa probably don't spill the beans, aunts and uncles, siblings, parents. I mean, you can even expand that outward. The media, the malls have, fake Santas that you go and take a picture on and on their lap and whatever. So there's this huge web of intricate lies that are all working together to present this fictional reality. And one day that kid's going to learn that that was a big lie. Their parents lied to their face. Their whole family has been lying to them. On some level, I believe that negatively impacts the safety and security and trust in that relationship. And if the child in that scenario doesn't come to that realization, doesn't realize, oh, wow, like everyone lying to me throughout my childhood has left some trust issues, it's very likely that they're going to perpetuate the same thing onto their kid. Because through trauma bonding, which I think is also a big factor of Christmas in the United States, through trauma bonding, the whole family is in a weird way connected over this lie. And they then want their kids to also be connected to them through this lie. They want things that I've heard, and obviously you can tell from this that I don't perpetuate that. And I have a son, and I don't perpetuate this Christmas lie onto him. I never have. And I received a lot of backlash from my family about my decision. And almost like similar to these coercive, guilt-ridden responses, these tactics to try to get me to do what they wanted me to do. And ultimately, I mean, it wasn't something that I was willing to shift my perspective on. I believe that lying to my child is wrong, and how other people feel about me telling my child the truth is within their domain. So anyway, but what I was getting at is with this specific situation, this Christmas lie that is perpetuated onto children, those children grow up and oftentimes go on to perpetuate it onto their kids and onto their kids and so on and so forth for generations. And the same thing happens with these other consent issues that I'm talking about. These coercive tactics, the guilt, the guilt trips, the ultimatums, the moral superiority arguments, ultimately just desperate attempts for compliance, desperate attempts to get someone to do what you want them to do. And there's this willingness to say anything, say whatever needs to be said so that they'll get what they want. And a lot of these patterns go unnoticed in our day to day. A lot of these patterns are subtle and almost like, I don't want to say sneaky. I don't think it's intentional every time. I think through media and marketing things, I don't think it's so sneaky. I think it's intentional in a lot of the instances. But I think interpersonally, especially with like our more intimate relationships, our friends, our loved ones, like family members and intimate partners and children, like I don't believe it's sinister or malevolent most of the time. I see them as just patterns that are perpetuating because there's a lack of awareness of the damage and the implications that come with these patterns. But all of these attempts, whether it be coercion, guilt trips, ultimatums, moral superiority, regardless of the specific approach to people pleasing, the attempt to get someone to people please, to do something because someone else wants them to, or because someone else believes it's the right thing, those instances create damage in the relationship. Every time that somebody says, I want you to do blank because it's the right thing to do, or because if you don't, then I will do this, or there will be this negative consequence. Every time that happens, that relationship deteriorates slightly. And further, every time that someone bypasses their own consent because they're worried about how someone else will feel, their relationship with themselves deteriorates. And they become less of a safe place to trust themselves, trust their own guidance, trust their own decision making. I know a lot of people who their people pleasing crutch is like overcommitting to being helpful and kind and supportive to others to the point where their own well-being, their own welfare is suffering. They're not able to do the things that they need to do for themselves, filling their own cups, meeting their own needs, because they're so deep in the people-pleasing patterns that they just overlook their own needs. And they only look and focus on other people's needs for whatever reason, whatever traumas they have, whatever life experiences that they have had leading up to the present day that have reinforced this belief that others' needs are more important than your own. It leads them into this pattern of like self-sacrifice, self-sabotage, self-neglect in order to satisfy others around them. And the impacts of this, I mean, they vary, of course, but they're not going to be positive. They're not going to leave that person fulfilled when they're neglecting themselves for the sake of others to the point where they're not getting their needs met. And so I don't know if, I hope that these instances and these examples are relevant and hitting close to home, because what I think, I guess, so we've talked a little bit about the negative patterns, the harmful patterns, the things that are causing damage. So how should it be done, right? There's should again. How could it be done? Let's use could. What would be the most ideal way to make requests if, for a second, let's assume that what I'm talking about is accurate and true, and we don't want those negative patterns perpetuating, and we don't want the negative outcomes that come with these people-pleasing patterns that are motivated by these coercive, these attempts to bypass consent. So how could it be done in a way that is helpful and healthy? And the answer is ultimately really simple. Every request must have space for a no. Otherwise, it's not a request. So if back to Jenny and Johnny, if Jenny wants Johnny to pick up his socks, really the most ideal way to phrase that request or present that request would be, Johnny, are you available to modify your existing habit of leaving your socks on the ground and putting them into the laundry basket instead of just leaving them on the ground? And that's it. That's the request. Are you available to do that? And now Johnny gets to answer that question honestly. He can decide, no, I'm not available to do that. For me, it is more than I am capable or willing to do. It's more than I have capacity for to pick up these socks. I just can't do it, not available for it. And at that time, Jenny then gets to decide what that means for her. Jenny gets to decide, how does she feel about living a life where there are socks on the floor all the time? And then she can make her own decisions from there. She can then decide, okay, well, I can tolerate socks on the floor, I guess. I guess I can tolerate it. I can navigate it. Or maybe I can't handle it. And if you're not available to do that, then I'm not available to be in this relationship. And then they can have conversations, and then maybe Johnny decides, well, it's more important for me that this relationship continue than it is for me to not pick up socks. So I want this relationship more than I want to leave my socks on the floor. So I am going to make this decision intrinsically. I'm intrinsically motivated to do this because I value this thing. I value this relationship. And it's subtle, but that's different than, Johnny, if you don't pick up your socks, I'm going to leave you. That's not a request. That's not asking Johnny for consent. That is coercive. That is a threat. That is an ultimatum. And that is reaching into his domain. And it certainly is going to feel like someone reaching into his domain. If you don't do this, then I'm going to do this. Well, where's the request? That's a threat. And even if it's something happened recently where someone, claimed that it wasn't a threat if they used the language of may. Well, Johnny, if you don't pick up your socks, I may leave you. Johnny's nervous system, Johnny's boundary, his force field protecting his domain is not going to differentiate may from will. It's still a threat. It may be a more thinly veiled threat, but it's still a threat. And that's not how you gain consent, ultimately. That's not a healthy way to get consent. Because Johnny in this scenario is not motivated to pick up his socks because he values picking up his socks or because he's determined that that's something that is important for him. Instead, he would be picking up his socks because he's afraid of his partner leaving him. That's not consent. And that's not going to last. I think that over time that is going to deteriorate and eat at that relationship. It's going to eat at their dynamic, and there's probably going to be some resentment that he's carrying, and it's likely that resentment and whatever other feelings that he has tied into this person threatening him, holding this, this consequent looming it over his head of, well, if I don't pick up my sock every time, this person's just going to leave. And so now there's issues with the safety and security in the relationship. He's not going to feel safe. He's going to be worried that if a single sock is left on the floor, something bad's going to happen. So he's going to be operating from a place of fear rather than a consensual agreement based on, valuing each other's needs. But there has to be space for a no in the request, otherwise you don't get there. There has to be the conversation of, are you available to do this? And if they say no, then you have the conversation of, well, this is what that means for me. And so now we need to have a separate conversation of how do we navigate this. From there, Johnny has the opportunity to look within himself and decide what's important, what he wants for himself, because all of those things are still within his domain. What he wants, what he needs, what his desires are. He has the ability to explore those things openly with the other person, along with what's in their domain of what they want and what they need. And then they can make a decision together, which is a consenting agreement. Both people are choosing to move forward in a certain direction. That is a recipe for safety and security and a strong relationship built on trust and respect of each other's domains and consent, versus the other, which is Johnny's doing it because he's afraid. And again, I wouldn't say one is right or one is better than the other. I mean, if you desire to live in a state of fear and you desire to be in relationships that are built on a foundation of insecurity, then continue to perpetuate these patterns. I mean, it's certainly not for me to decide what is right or best for anyone else in their life. My goal is to inform people, educate people, to shed light on these really subtle communication patterns that are shaping and impacting our relationships. And a lot of times they're shaping and impacting our relationships without us knowing it, and shaping it in a way that's not beneficial or serving the security of the relationship. So I hope that this has been helpful for some people. I hope that this makes sense. And if anyone has any questions or wants to explore this topic or these concepts more deeply, definitely available for that. You can send an email at contact@helpingtheherd.com. You can reach out on all of the social medias, and comment on the YouTube or Spotify or whatever. Comment wherever you can, and we'll be happy to respond. We also have some really cool things. Helping the Herd has some really cool things that we're working on right now. There's a phone number. So if you go to the website, you can just text me directly. You can text communication coaches directly for free at no charge. And we'll answer your questions. We'll help you navigate or explore whatever you have going on. And it doesn't cost anything. So I encourage you to go to the website and, reach out through the website at helpingtheherd.com. We also have an app that is really close to being released. This app is going to help us provide structure to people for moving through conflict. I'm really excited about that app being released. We're really close, so stay tuned for that. We still have the internal exploration cards, which are a really beautiful tool that work alongside nonviolent communication. They help build a vocabulary for how you're feeling and what you're needing. And I can speak to my own personal experience as a young boy who was encouraged as a child to not dwell on feelings and to not really share my feelings and to just move on because everybody has feelings and, no one wants to hear them. I didn't really learn to process my feelings, let alone even acknowledge that they were there, and what they were and where they were stemming from. And so this tool is designed to help people understand their experience more deeply. What feelings are arising and what unmet needs are they connected to? So that way you can focus on getting your needs met so those feelings can subside. So those cards are available on the website. And yeah, I've got some pretty cool, I think, some pretty cool ideas for the podcast for next year. We're going to be exploring a segment called Know Your Neighbor, where I interview all like a very wide variety of people and what they do, how they spend their time, what their beliefs are, why they believe the things that they believe. And the intention of this new segment starting next year, the intention is to just bring understanding, create intimacy with people that I think we jump to conclusions about because of what we hear about certain groups of people, whether it be specific religious ideologies or, their career paths or their belief structure outside of religion. I see a lot of assumptions, even within myself, and that's ultimately where this project is stemming from. Is I notice myself jumping to conclusions at times of like opinions or classifications of certain people. Oh, well, this person is this. They believe this thing. Well, that must mean X, Y, and Z. And it's not to say that it's not accurate, but people are. I strongly believe that people are very unique, and that what is very common in our society, or in my society, the society I live in and that I operate in, is it seems like there's this constant attempt to put people in boxes. Well, you're a Democrat. Well, he's a Republican. And this person is, has this sexual orientation, or this person, has this belief. And I don't believe that we belong in boxes. I think that it would be better for us to view the world and view the people in the world. If there's, let's say, 5 billion people, and I don't know what the current number is. I know at some point it was 6 or close to 6. I've not done my research on this. However many billions of people there are, that's how many billions of boxes there are. And each individual box may overlap with other boxes. And in some cases, they may overlap considerably. And there may be a large number of people whose box sits almost perfectly on top of the other person's box. But everyone's life experience and everyone's belief structures, they're all going to differ because everyone's had a completely different experience in their life, a unique set of circumstances that they have had that has led them to who they are now. And I think it's a disservice to put everyone into anyone into the same box as another person because they haven't had the same experiences and therefore they're not in the same box. And so ultimately, while our boxes may overlap, everyone's box is unique. And I think that if we can honor the uniqueness of everyone's boxes, of everyone's experience, I think that will help us find the commonalities that are really there rather than the assumed commonalities that we have about people that we don't know and we don't fully understand. And so I'm really excited about the Know Your Neighbor segment, and I hope that you choose to listen. And if you have any guests, if you want to be a part of that, if you want to share your story and share, how you've gotten to where you are in life and what you believe, and hopefully continue to hold this theme of the podcast, which is empowerment and inspiration. I certainly hope that this segment will still satisfy that with this for the podcast and for the guests and for our listeners, to provide inspiration and empowerment. And so if you're interested in that, or you know people that you think would be really interesting for people to learn about and hear about their experiences, please let me know. Again, contact at Helping the Herd. Just shoot us an email with their information or comment on wherever you're listening to this. So with that, this will conclude the first solo episode of the Do You Feel Heard podcast. I hope you enjoyed it, and I look forward to any feedback that y'all have. Thanks.
This has been the Do You Feel Heard podcast. If you're interested in resources that will help you move through conflict, you can go to doyoufeelheard.com, where we have tools for individuals and couples.